Oh, very well, all right.
For now.
Yes, they agree.
Good morning. My name is Javed Anwar. I'm the chair on the Committee of Innovation, Data and Educational Analytics. It is 9 a.m. and I would like to call the January 23rd, 2022. Is it 20? Should be 2023. Sorry. Committee on Innovation, Data and Educational Analytics meeting to order. This meeting is being held via live broadcast. Members are like, when I call your name, please announce your presence. S. Javed Anwar, aye. Welcome Wilson.
Present.
Richard Clemmer.
Here.
Fred Farias.
Here.
Robert Gunn.
Present.
Sam Tone.
Here.
Daniel Wong. Georgia Henji.
Present.
Please record in the minutes that we have a quorum. Agenda item 2 is consideration of possible action to approve the minutes from the October 26, 22 committee meeting. Members, do I have a motion and a second, please?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody against it, say nay, please. Motion passes. We move on to agenda item number 3 is a public testimony on agenda items relating to the Committee on Innovation, Data and Educational Analytics. We do not have anyone registered to testify, so we go to the next item. Agenda item number 4 is consideration of possible action to approve the consent calendar. The consent calendar includes the item that can be approved without comments or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more of our attention. The consent items are highlighted items in gray on the agenda. Of course, any board member can request that an agenda item can be added or removed from the consent calendar. We are going to vote on the consent items in 2 votes. One non-rule item and one on rules item. Members, following items is on the consent calendar consideration. Item 5C, consideration of possible action to delegate to the commissioner authority to approve the data report related to the non-transferable credit and transfer courses. Does anyone wants to remove this item from the consent calendar? Are there any other agenda item that anybody wants to add? Members, I have a motion and a second, please.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye. Any noes? The agenda item passes. Agenda item 5A is Dr. Cara Larkin Skinner, Assistant Commissioner for Data Management Research, and Dr. Charles Contreras, Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, will brief the presentation and be available for any question. This item is information only. Dr. Larkin.
I'd like to get things started. Again, I am Chad Kenterrell-Pulse, Assistant for Student Financial Aid. There we go. Thank you. I'm Chad Kenterrell-Pulse, Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide you with some information about the agency's financial aid data. I was very pleased when my colleague, Cara Larkin Skinner, Assistant Commissioner for Data Management Research, invited me to join her in today's presentation. The agency's data regarding financial aid is one example of the many ways that financial aid is really a cross-divisional effort at the agency. Next slide, please. We wanted to provide you with some background and information on financial aid as a background for tomorrow's major policy discussion on affordability. To start, I thought it might be helpful to provide the broadest categorization of how we look at financial aid. Financial aid is often categorized as falling into two broad groups. Next slide. The first group is often called gift aid. Gift aid represents financial aid that does not have any repayment or service expectations attached. The funding is a gift to the student to help cover the costs of education, such as grants, scholarships, exemptions, waivers. I've provided some examples of some of the largest gift aid programs that support Texas students, such as the federal Pell Grant program, the state's 3 grant programs that support our different sectors of higher education, and the Hazelwood exemption. Next slide. The second group is often referred to as self-help. Self-help gets its name from the fact that there are actions on the recipient's part regarding this funding, whether it's repayment of the funding, such as a loan, or a certain service that the recipient must provide, such as working to earn a work-study paycheck, or providing a certain number of years of service to receive a repayment towards a loan, or to prevent a conditional scholarship from converting to a loan. I've provided examples of some of the federal and state programs which fall into the self-help category, numerous work-study programs that we have, the major loan programs like the federal direct loan and the state's college access loan, as well as our upcoming forward loan program, as well as loan repayment programs that we have. Next slide. One of the most prominent deliverables from our financial aid data is the annual financial aid report. And it's likely the largest agency effort to pull our financial aid data together into one place. I'll provide some highlights from our most recent report in the next slides. Next slide. In the 2020-2021 academic year, undergraduates at Texas institutions received almost $9.4 billion in financial aid from all sources. This is actually down a bit from the prior year due to pandemic-related drops in enrollment, but we expect this to increase when we finish collecting data for the most recent academic year. In the pie chart on the left, you'll see that the federal government provides the largest share of financial aid, followed by institutions themselves. And in the bar chart on the right, you'll see that for undergraduates, gift aid represents almost 2/3 of the financial aid funding, the majority of that coming from the federal Pell Grant program. For self-help, which represents about 1/3 of financial aid received, over 99% of that funding comes from loans, mostly from the federal direct loan program. Next slide. This slide provides a picture of how financial aid is broken down based on the 3 primary sectors of higher education in Texas: public 2-year institutions, public 4-year institutions, and the private institutions. On the left side of the bar, you'll see the different sources of gift aid. And then on the right, in the yellow, you'll see the self-help aid, which is primarily loans, which really is loans on this slide. There's only about, I think, 0.5% that comes from work-study programs. So this provides a picture of how the proportion of gift aid versus self-help varies by sector and impacts debt levels across sectors. Something that I should clarify about this slide is that it represents the percentages of financial aid received by students. What it doesn't capture is the level of funding needed, but that students did not receive. For example, the agency's data collection allows us to know the aid received by every student. However, we don't have data on the students who couldn't attend because they did not receive enough financial aid to make it feasible, nor do we have data on the extra hours a student may be working in a non-work study position to help cover the gap between financial aid and what they can afford.
Why not?
Why don't we have that data? Our data is collected from the institutions of higher education and reports on all of the attendees. And we use it in comparison. We get financial aid data on all attendees. We also get enrollment data on all attendees, which we compare. We don't have information on the individuals who chose not to attend.
Yeah, it is. So we just to weigh in on that issue, we do from some of the institutions will survey students that don't matriculate with them. So we know through our partnership with the National Student Clearinghouse where students go who don't matriculate in Texas institutions, and the institutions know that as well. Some of them will survey the students to ask, well, why did you choose Alabama instead of us, or why did you choose Georgetown instead of us? And so anecdotally, what we hear back from the institutions is that one of the major factors is financial aid. So we know that some of the out-of-state institutions have been fairly aggressive at offering pretty generous financial aid packages to Texas students.
Yeah, I'm more interested in a young man or young woman who doesn't attend because their financial aid doesn't match what they can afford to attend at all.
Yeah. So we are particularly leaning in on we had an earlier discussion with y'all about the top 10 percenters that we were seeing not enroll. And so we are surveying those students to try to get a sense of where financial aid, where costs might have been a driver and students deciding not to attend. So we should have more information back, at least for that subset of students for the board.
Next slide.
Before you leave
Yes,
that slide,
sure.
could you put in perspective for us the size of the loans for the 2 years versus the public versus the private and independent, if you could?
I don't have specific dollar amounts, but later in the presentation, we do have some information broken down by sector in relation to the debt management goals of the Building a Talent Strong Texas. So we will have some more loan data in a few more slides.
Yeah, and we
And
can,
it'll be broken into those categories?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, and we can, that's something that we could dig into and get back to you with more precise information.
So this slide provides a bit of the background for our primary state grant programs, going back to the concept that we were talking about before in terms of students who are eligible or need the funds but aren't receiving them. We use the institutional enrollment at the institutions that we get from the institutions, as well as the financial aid data, to estimate the number of students who would be eligible for each of our 3 primary grant programs. And then we compare that to how many students receive the funding. Overall, across our 3 primary state grant programs, less than 50% of eligible students actually receive funding. On the far right of this slide, we have some estimates of what we believe FY22 will look like. And those increases in the estimated percentages are due in part to the investments in these programs that the legislature made this last session, but also because we have seen many low-income students opting to stop out or not enroll in college due to the lack of funding. Next slide. The final slide I have for you before turning things over to Kara provides an example of how we're able to use both the enrollment and the financial aid data from the institutions to look at various characteristics. While there are many examples that we could display, for this example, we chose to look at student race and ethnicity. So the chart compares the race and ethnicity breakdown of Texas grant recipients to the overall enrollment at public universities, which is the sector supported by Texas grants. You'll see that Texas grant recipients are disproportionately Hispanic in comparison to the overall enrollment, indicating the significant dependence that this population has on financial aid in order to access higher education. As noted in Building a Talent Strong Texas, we must reach our goals equitably in order to meet the potential of the plan. So I'll turn things over to Kara to talk a bit about the connection between financial aid and the Building a Talent Strong Texas plan. Next slide.
Thank you, Chad. Next slide. Good morning, everyone. Our ability to reach the goals of the Talent Strong Texas plan rely on our financial aid programs. This is especially for increasing access to higher education and making higher education more affordable and attainable. One of the Talent Strong Texas overarching goals that we will focus on today is for 95% of our graduates to graduate with manageable debt or no debt. The methodology utilized for calculating the manageable debt metric involves comparing the student investment to long-term wages. This is essentially a ratio of debt incurred to wages earned 5 years post-graduation. Next slide, please. The Talent Strong Texas manageable debt metric is broken into 3 categories. This is high debt, manageable debt, and no debt. A graduate is classified as high debt if the ratio of debt incurred to wages earned is greater than 10%. Manageable debt is when the graduate has a ratio of less than 10%, but has incurred some level of debt. When we look at the progress toward the Talent Strong Texas goal of 95% of our graduates will have manageable debt or no debt, we find that at a statewide level, we are extremely close to this goal. In our most recently available data, 94% of our graduates graduated with no or manageable debt. However, when we disaggregate the data, we start to see a different story. We see that individuals graduating with a bachelor's degree were more likely to fall in the high levels of debt than those that obtained an associate's or certificate program. As you can see on this slide, 8.5% of bachelor degree earners fell into the high debt category compared to 2.7% of associate degree earners. When we examine this data in comparison to our overarching goal of 95%, we see that we met the threshold for associates and certificate earners, but we fall slightly short for the threshold for bachelor's degree earners. Next slide, please.
I have a question before we leave that slide.
Sure.
Are we measuring apples to apples? Because 2-year public is, associates 2 years and certificates are 2 years and bachelors are 4 years. So that's 2 extra years of costs. Are we measuring with bachelors just only the first 2 years? Or are we measuring the whole 4 years?
It is the entire 4 years. So it's the entire debt incurred
Okay.
versus wages. So in some ways apples to apples, but in some ways oranges to apples, because you would think that the wages would sort of put on a level playing field, because if you've gotten an associate's degree, your wages are probably somewhat in line with what you would expect with an associate's degree, versus when you get a 4 years degree, you would hope that the wages would be increased because of that increase in your education. So that's the way in which that it is apples to apples, but it's certainly a bachelor's degree is going to cost more. It does cost more. And as we see in this data, our students do incur more debt while working on that, which is somewhat to be expected.
But I think that's to be expected, because the people that are getting the associate's or certificate degrees pretty much have an idea of what area they're going into. And those are paying jobs right away, versus a bachelor's. It depends on what you're studying. If you're studying, different types of bachelor's degree programs, they're more difficult to get some jobs.
Yeah.
So that sort of goes in line with the thinking, I think, in terms of, I think the choices that people make are the key here. And looking at not necessarily the debt ratio, but really your goals of what you want to do. And I think the certificate programs, those folks seem to know what their line of program, what they're doing, and they have a job pretty much lined up or what they want to do. So that data pretty much, I think, makes sense.
So I think it'd be important to underline a couple of points that you just made, Mr. Chairman, because so when we're talking about what kind of debt is manageable and or not, the way that we're estimating manageable debt is relative to the typical wage experience for the credential holders for that type of credential. And not just bachelor's degree and associate's degree, but breaking that down also into, well, what type of bachelor's degree and what type of associate's degree. So for our engineering graduates, you know, they can take out a lot more debt and still be within the manageable debt versus somebody who's pursuing a bachelor's in social work, for example.
Mhm.
And then all of that's rolled up into the percentage of students that you see here as having manageable debt or debt that's too high. It's not just for the generic sort of associate's degree or bachelor's degree, but it's for those for the types of degree programs. So this is we'll be also providing, we've provided this level of information by program to all the institutions in a first pass. And we'll be providing even more detailed dashboards to the institutions so they can get into the specific majors and see what that distribution of debt looks like. Because there are a lot of institutions that have been on top of this, but a lot of other institutions where they've sort of had a separate conversation about, well, how much are students eligible to take out in student loans? And they're not putting that in the context of the kind of program that the student is pursuing and what those expectations can be if they pursue one kind of major versus another.
I agree.
I have a question real quick on slide 8. With half the eligible students receiving state grants, is that because of a lack of understanding that they're eligible and how much? I mean, that seems if we have enough money to have 100% of eligible students accessing grants, that would cut down on the debt aspect.
Yeah, that's a
It's-
great point. I had the same question I was going to ask Charles. Is that what is the disconnect there?
It's funded.
Yeah, it's just a matter of appropriation. So this will be so this is the kind of data that the next couple of weeks when I'll be up before Senate Finance and House Appropriations, and our team will be working closely with the appropriators. And all of these percentages they're just a result of how much was appropriated for these different financial aid programs. And historically, really, the coordinating board has been the principal advocate for the state financial aid. So we want to make sure that you all have the most current information about sort of what the histories look like and where we are. I mean, we estimate right now, so we do have an exceptional item in our legislative appropriations request just to try to hold steady on these percentages that you see estimated for FY22. To fund 100% of the eligible students for the biennium, we estimate would be somewhere in the neighborhood of about a $700 million appropriation, about $350 million a year to be able to get those percentages up so that we could have all the eligible students. Generally, they don't fund, they haven't funded enough to have anywhere near all the eligible students, especially at the two-year institutions where we only have about 28% of eligible students being able to get financial aid. That means students have to fill in that gap somewhere if they're going to attend with more work, which can lengthen their time to completion with more debt. So we do see students who have more debt than they should for their credentials. So it's really, this is an important piece of information in these appropriations conversations that are going to be coming up.
And how is it decided who gets the grant versus who doesn't? Is it the most needy? Is it based on?
Yeah, it's a combination of student need, and then there's a priority model. So they look at they also consider student preparation and students' likelihood to complete, but it's primarily based on student need, and those determinations are made within the institutions. So the allocation of the TEOG and Texas grant is to the institution. So we don't award aid generally to individual students. So where we get closer to that is some of the kinds of more innovative programs that Chad's team has been helping to facilitate, for example, around the transfer grants. But that's different from what we've typically done, where you could do a grant, a block grant, essentially to the institutions. They evaluate student need and determine which students are going to receive these grants.
So I'm gonna ask a question that's not specifically related to all this data, but we're collecting all this data. Okay, that's been a big part of your initiative, all right? And then we're going all around, we're talking to all these employers and trying to figure out what they want, blah, 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 with students, all that kind of stuff. Are we asking the question, is there a paradigm shift changing in the way we should educate students? And in other words, is the old 4-year bachelor's degree, is that going to be passé at some point? And are we asking that question? And in response to, if we are asking that question, how do we plan for that?
So we this is something that we are asking and talking about a lot. I was doing a presentation on community college finance yesterday at the Dallas Fed, and this is one of the issues that I brought up. Our funding system, our financial aid, in general, our state policy tends to assume that pretty traditional model that students are going to be enrolled full-time, that all of their credits are going to come from one institution. And that's just not how students are going to college now. And it's not what the trajectory looks like. So the trajectory looks like folks are going to need to reskill and upskill multiple times. So they might have more and less intensive periods of enrollment. But instead of saying, well, students are going to have this intense period of education and then Godspeed and development will be in touch kind of thing. It's got to be more of a kind of lifelong learning type relationship, even for the universities, even for residential universities. There are some of our presidents that when I talk to presidents and chancellors, there are some of them that are definitely thinking about this, about how they might have something more like one of the presidents calls it a lifetime warranty with their degree programs, to be more intentional about how they can engage students over time. Also, we see some institutions that are more intentional about serving students who have to go part-time. And so they're less focused on typical graduation rates and more focused on improving their degree productivity, for example. So like we heard a lot about that at UTEP, for example, where they focused a lot on improving their degree productivity, but they have a lot of part-time students. In general, I think our policies, though, have not caught up. So this is we are as we're updating, for example, the community college finance system. This has got important implications for where we focus the incentives. We're trying to focus the incentives more on the outcomes and less on the credits and types of credits that students are enrolled in while they're pursuing those outcomes. But we do have a long way to go as a state. And I think your question is exactly right. So we're raising the question. I can't report back that all the institutions are really embracing this issue.
I have a quick question. I'm trying to kind of square the math. And one of the things that comes to my mind is how many students could apply that are coming out of state high schools or not out of high school? How many are eligible? And then how many don't get aid? And then the why. And I think Rick was asking about that. How many are being rejected? How many are not getting the opportunity because we ran out of money? Or how does I'm just trying to figure out the process. And percentages help, but actual numbers, because that's what really matters. Are we talking about how many students are not able to go because they can't get money?
The kind of combining the information we
It's
have.
yes,
from
kind of a
PTA
yeah.
and creating that funnel.
Yeah.
Because we do have some funnel information. Oh, I forgot again. I apologize. So creating that funnel of, you have your, I think the funnel I've seen is when they take kind of the 8th grade cohort and watch, how that group, what of those students graduate from high school? What of those students go on to college? What of those students graduate from college? And kind of adding in a piece to that of for what you're missing between the high school and the college, where is that driven by financial aid versus maybe how is that funnel if you added on not just college, but career, with TEA as they look at college, career and military and, how does that change the funnel? But in terms of matching up, kind of where does aid play into someone not making it from high school into college? At this point, we haven't pulled that kind of data together. And that's something that, based on this conversation, we can go back and start talking about what data do we have that might be able to fill in that blank? What data might we need to consider collecting to be able to fill in that blank? But that would definitely take some discussions to try to pull those pieces together. Commissioner?
Well, defer to Kara, and Kara's team did update that 8th grade cohort report, which I think I think you're asking a more general question about, well, what's our production of high school graduates look like? How many of those are enrolling in higher education? And then we can ask the question about what the drivers are around why folks are enrolling. So we do have fairly recent data on that 8th grade cohort report that Kara and her team can share with the board. To Chad's point on how much students are non-enrolling because of financial aid versus what I'm hearing from institutions is a lot of so you see that increased percentage of eligible students for Texas grant, for example, where we're like about 55%, and all of a sudden we're at about 71% of eligible students. What I'm hearing is that they saw a significant drop off of students who are low income, just not enrolling. And their impression, and some of them have done surveys of students, is that a lot of that is because of what we see happen with wages, especially for entry level jobs. So when a lot of students can make $16, $17, $19 an hour, then there's less incentive for them to enroll. And so that means there's fewer students who would be eligible for Texas grant who are drawing that down. So that's why we've seen that increased percentage.
Yeah, I think both those answers are real helpful. Would help be there's 100,000 students that didn't get to go to college because they couldn't get money.
Yeah.
Right. Percentages are great. We got to have them, but when it's real lives and real people, it'd be nice to know. And is there an awareness problem in the high schools of, hey, you need to go to college or you don't? I mean, it's your personal choice, but here's what's available. And I'm going to help walk you through. And then it's input and output, right?
Yep.
We have 1 million people needing money and we only have 8 billion, 9 billion. And I know you said 700 million. It would help me kind of big picture. I don't know if anybody else feels that way.
Yeah, we can definitely pull that together for y'all. And that's the kind of information we're going to be pulling together over the next couple of weeks anyway. So, yeah, we will definitely get that to you.
That's very helpful. Thanks.
So is it in our purview to track, kind of as an exit poll on all students that apply and they're turned down? Is it within our purview to reach out to those students and interview them and find out why? Or is that up to the Texas Grant Program and others? Or is that some oversight? It seems to me we need to, if we can provide some guidance as to trends or why certain things are happening and kind of catch them early.
Yeah,
that might benefit.
so we haven't done that kind of general survey research. We are doing some now specifically focused on those top 10% students. Now I would certainly so generally it's been institutions that have done those kinds of surveys. I think it's a great suggestion for us to consider sort of broader survey research to get a sense of sort of what the trends are looking like for Texas students who enroll and who don't enroll. And so that's definitely something that we could
I mean,
consider.
it seemed like part of the Talent Strong Texas initiative would be to figure out where they fall through the cracks
Mhm.
and at what point lack of information in high school, they apply for a loan, they get turned down, they go home and that's it. To try and, come up with fixes in the system to.
The other place that we get feedback and that we can be intentional about reaching out to students. So this spring, we're going to roll out My Texas Future. And so we haven't made the push on it, but y'all can already see if you go to mytexasfuture.org, kind of the initial version. We're going to roll out first to adults, and then by the summer will be more for the community college students and the high school students. So within that, we've got information about your different kinds of jobs available, what's projected to grow, what the wages are typically in Texas for those, also what kind of programs are available. And then there's a whole section on paying for college and sort of what that looks like that we want to continue to build out. That's also where students are going to be registering to get the chatbot, where we can text with them for updates. And we can also use that as a way to check in with them or or do surveys with the students about kind of what they're concerned about, and checking in with them, especially if they decided not to enroll. So we would have a little more direct access this year than we've typically had.
Do you have a quick, sorry about, go ahead.
I know one of our goals is to increase like doctoral research graduates. Are we stopping this data at bachelor's, or are we doing it for master's students and doctoral students, or is it just bachelor's and associates?
Do you mean the manageable debt metric? Yes, we are only tracking that for bachelor's and below.
Yeah.
Predominantly because of the way that financial aid is awarded, although you can still get loans at the doctoral level. There's a lot more aid programs, bachelor's and below. So that's all we have tracked so far.
Yeah, I would underline the so far on that.
Yeah.
Because as we get with the institutions better feedback mechanisms. So we primarily focused most of the attention is on the undergraduates right now. But absolutely on the other side of that, especially for master's programs, we see a lot of relatively high cost master's programs where students will take out a lot of debt. And then sometimes there's a serious question about what's the return on the investment in that master's program. Does that really translate into a wage premium that's going to offset those costs and let you be able to pay off those loans? So that's on the roadmap, but on the other side of what we're doing with the undergraduates.
Yeah, that's an important topic for me as well. Earlier slides that Dr. Quintero-Poles put up, my question is, here we're talking, we know we have a shortage of funds, but then we've got to see what we're actually allocating or is allocated to make sure that's being used efficiently. And HRIs, you put up a slide there, the good percentage, although it's a higher percentage of the self-help loans. And do we have any data, or do we keep data on the commitments of those commitments? And because it's one side about, yes, we're short, but how efficiently are we using the funds that we have now? And especially on the commitments with students coming out of the health professions with high loans, most of them do get jobs, so those are good investments, but are we tracking the commitments?
And one of the things I'll acknowledge isn't in these slides is the information about our loan repayment programs. Our loan repayment programs focus very specifically on providing support to individuals who are going out and working in high demand, high shortage areas, teaching, mental health. We have programs for physicians, peace officers. So really trying to help support those individuals who are going where we need them in the states. And in doing so, helping them to pay off the loans that they may have accrued if they're going into, quite often when they're going into these health professional shortage areas and the like, their pay is not the same as if they stayed in a more private practice that's in an area that pays higher and things like that. So trying to address that piece of individuals who go to into a place that's not going to pay the wage premium that's typical for the degree, and providing these loan repayment programs to help. Now, admittedly, there's only 6 programs in the states that are funded. There's actually, I think, about 16 on the books, but only 6 of them are actually funded. And so it's not going to solve the entire debt piece. But that's a piece that I want to acknowledge isn't in these slides because it's more for individuals after they've graduated, whereas these slides are talking about what happens while they're in college.
Thank you. For me, one of the biggest factor affecting this outcome, this slide's outcome, is the 10% ratio. I know we need some reference point, but is it universally used? 10%, 10% below 10% is manageable, about 10% is unmanageable. So I think I look at mainly is the no debt and debt, but of course we still need to in between get some percentage. So where the 10% come from?
So I'm fairly new, so I don't know where, why that threshold was decided, but what I can tell you is that they took the amount of debt and then estimated that into what a monthly payment would be over the 10 years, which is equivalent to how the federal government does your loan repayment programs over 10 years. And then divided that over the wages. And then so that gives you your ratio. And
Sure,
then,
I understand that part, but
So-
the 10%
Yeah.
is
The
very
rationale.
arbitrary, yeah.
So I might actually pull Deputy Commissioner David Troutman up to help answer that question because he's been involved with us as we were looking at sort of different options and where you set these thresholds. And that is Mr. Wong, that is a key question about sort of how much debt is too much debt.
Sure. So the 2% came from the federal government.
Sure.
So they created that standard.
Turn your mic on.
It's on.
Oh,
Okay.
Thank you.
So that number, the 2% came from the federal government standard. And so that's been.
There's the problem.
But then it was adopted across the country for all the systems and across the state. So that's where the 10% came from. And I'm hoping that that's just when I talked to the commissioner about this, I feel like this is sort of a foundational piece where we can springboard off of and actually evolve over time and not just make this sort of the normal standard, right? So we'll start here and then wrestle with it to try to get it down to 8, 6, 4.
I'm good with using something that somebody is recognized instead of, so we can defend it. Somebody asked that question, the federal government is using it, regardless of what your opinion is. But it's not, we don't create it ourselves. That's good. Nobody complain about 10% is less 10% is no debt and it's manageable or unmanageable. But I think it's good answer. Okay. Federal government use it. We use it. Good.
Members, does anyone have any questions? Oh,
I'm told that we've gone quite a bit over time. So, and I think the goal today was to really, lead to this conversation that you all had. So I'm proposing to just close this out.
Well, but I do think it's worth emphasizing that we do see a lot of variation, again, just as we drill into this data. So when we provide this gives you an idea when we provide dashboards to the institutions, then they'll have even where they can see by major, by student demographic, by gender, by income, sort of what those distributions look like. And there's a lot, let me just say, there's a lot of variation also across institutions. So you can see where the institutions have really leaned into this issue and are monitoring it more closely. And you see sort of much tighter bands, and then other places where you see a lot of variance across student characteristics, so male and female students, or even differences by race.
Yeah, so I really appreciate the board's comments, and this is a very important topic, as you can tell, because all the board members had questions, and this is one of the missions of the coordinating board, affordability of higher education in our state. So appreciate the presentation. I'm sorry, Dr. Carr, were you finished already, Dr.?
I'm finished. Thank
Okay,
you.
well, I know that
There was,
Mr. Anwar's committee, but
There was
Richard,
one question there was one comment in the background material where it talked about the post-secondary that's over 66%. So I was curious, the difference, or 68% of the students on the post-secondary receiving funding in the briefing material associated with it. So it's at a much higher rate than the 4-year, right? On the page that we have here, talks about 68%. Receive some form of financial aid.
Oh, some students receiving some form of financial aid.
Oh, that,
But it was on the post-secondary basis, right?
that percentage is specifically about students who have received any form of financial aids. So if they received a scholarship, if they received a loan, if they received anything, that's the percentage of students who got something.
Beyond just the loans themselves.
It could be loans, it kind of pulls it all together. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure how that line was pulled out. So we'll have to read up on that. No, it's percentage of students. Yes. It is percentage of students. Yep.
Well, since it was in the briefing material, I just want to be sure I understood it.
Yep.
That's meant to capture sort of broader, like it just give a sense of how many students are depending on some form of student financial aid. So the vast majority of students, nearly 70% of students have some sort of financial aid that they're receiving. But that could, to Chad's point, that could be loans, or it could be grants, or.
Members, does anyone have any questions? If not, yeah, I know we move to agenda item 5B is update of data modernization initiative. And Miss Lori Fay, Deputy Commissioner for Data Analytics and Innovation, will provide a presentation, be available to any question. This item is for information only. That's right.
On. There we go. Thank you, Chairman Anwar, and good morning, committee members. In the interest of time, I will move through this very quickly, but the previous conversation just reinforces how important the infrastructure work is that we're doing at the agency in order to more easily and quickly ask and answer the types of questions that you all had. Next slide. This is our regular quarterly update. I'll, skip this part, even though I always include it because the goals of this effort are still our North Star, and that is to be sure that we can equip folks with both internally and externally with the kind of insight and decision support information that actually helps foster solutions to the kinds of conversation you were just having. So these things should become familiar. It should be familiar with you to you all at this point. So we'll move to the next slide. The next few months of the Data Modernization Initiative are especially exciting. For the last 2+ years, we've been at work in the background, migrating data, creating data pipelines in the cloud, all of the less interesting and glamorous part of the work that actually enables the kinds of things that you all were just talking about. Over the next 3 quarters, we will be rolling, like those things will become visible, and we're very excited about that. You've probably seen the new website. That was one of the strands of work that was launched over the Thanksgiving holidays and has, to great feedback, and we'll continue to evolve that. So that's sort of one big domino that was the first one to fall. Over the next 3 quarters, we'll be doing some equally exciting things. One will be we'll be providing privileged reports. So some of the insight that the commissioner was just commenting on about what's actually happening with different groups of students at the institution level, we'll be able to give the institutions that very granular insight. And we'll be doing that first on 3 dimensions. Transfer students. So what's happening? What are incoming transfer students coming equipped with, and what's happening with students when they leave without completing? Persistence in graduation, to the degree productivity conversation we were just having, and then labor market outcomes. So what's actually happening with students once they leave programs? What are their actual wages, and how does that vary based on student characteristics? So very excited for those things to start to roll out. We're putting those in front of institutions for feedback now. We will also be launching a new data site for the agency, again, consistent with the look and feel of the agency, anchored in the plan, the Building a Talent Strong Texas plan, and with much more interactive visualizations and insightful information than we have provided in the past. So super excited about that. And you can see, sort of the drumbeat of deliverables that we'll be launching. But I think the overriding message is all of the background work is going to start bearing fruit for you, for our institutions, for our stakeholders. So we're very excited by that. Next slide. This is the more detailed one. As you all know, this project has 23 plus strands of work associated with it. So innumerable tasks, activities, staff involved. This gives you the more detailed view in case you're interested. And as you know, as you may remember, September is when our final tranche of GEAR funds, which are funding this effort, expire. And so the next 3 quarters are of great importance. And we're looking forward to sharing those things with you all as they become public. With that, that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are you sure you have enough deliverables?
Please don't say that in front of the commissioner.
Yeah. Actually, this is
He has a reputation.
This is a great question, Mr. Chairman, and something that we talk about frequently. I do want to underline, though, an important point that Lori made about that we've been able to move so quickly on so many fronts in this project because of a combination of philanthropy and that partnership with the foundation, and also because of the allocation of the GEAR funds for implementation. So that tens of millions of dollars were allocated by Governor Abbott and legislative leadership. So we are more than a year ahead of where Lori and I might have expected we'd be because of those commitment of funds. This is also, let me just say, one of the important exceptional items we're going to be discussing with the Appropriations and Finance Committee is recurring state funding to make sure that we're going to be able to maintain the systems, to continue to update those deliverables, and be able to really make the best use of this new infrastructure that we've been able to put in place.
Good work. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I guess if there's not any more question, we move on to agenda item 5C, was approved on the consent calendar. Agenda item 5D is a report of Financial Aid Advisory Committee on activity. Ms. Rachel Garrett and Ms. Denise Welch, past chair of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee, will present a summary of the committee's recent activities and will be available to answer any question. This item is for information only.
Good morning. My name is Denise Welch. I'm the past chair of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. Thank you for having us today.
And I am Rochelle Garrett. I am the current chair of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee.
So I'd like to, if you'll go to the next slide, please, give you just a summary of what we have accomplished this past year. Working with coordinating board staff, we hosted several presentations and discussions relative to state financial aid funding and best practices within higher education administration. These discussions included succession planning, leveraging financial aid, administering gear funds, which included reskilling and upskilling, recruiting and retaining students after the COVID-19. And our presentations included mental health presentation when your business impacts your business, state student financial aid and higher education in Texas, and the National Financial Aid Administrators Association of Certified Aid Administrators Program. Working with financial aid administrators and high school representatives on recommended changes on the TASFA application, which is paper, and we're transitioning to an online form. We worked very closely with them. We also provided input on processing for the Texas Transfer Grant Pilot Program, Authority Transfer Funds Programs, and the Financial Aid Database Program. Assisting users acceptance testing for the new data submission program for the financial aid database process. So we were quite busy. Next slide, please. We do have some recommendations. We do recommend that you can let us continue to work with the coordinating board as the Financial Aid Advisory Committee to provide feedback on new recommendations and initiatives. That would be real and practical on the state financial aid programs, policies, and procedures. Also, to create and utilize the Financial Aid Advisory Committee and their subcommittees with subject matter experts to review and identify areas of development. Also, continue to work or create necessary subcommittees to share information that help both the coordinating board and the institutions make informed decisions related to financial aid concerns and challenges in higher education. Also, continue to allow members to represent all sectors in order to provide a perspective on ways to advance the state's missions and goal in building a better talent strong Texas. That's all I have at this point. Thank you so much. I'll open it for questions.
How many people are on your committee and where does everybody come from?
We have several members from different sects of the higher education. We have, I'd have to count them, to be honest. Several community college members, as well as private institution members and four-year institution, as well as the TSTC system.
We also have high school counselor representatives and a student representative as well. So the committee is really is made up a cross section of individuals that really want to improve and innovate and review all of our financial aid processes that we have, in particular with working with the coordinating board on those.
There's about 20 members on the committee. We do also have a representative from the Texas Financial Aid Administrators Association as well.
So do we give them tasks to study or, and then they come back with, kind of polling the, the institutions and come back with a recommendation, or how does it?
So there's some specific topics, specific questions that they'll take up. I'd say we especially appreciate their invaluable sounding board as we're thinking about potential changes and what the implications might be for institutions to have folks from across the different sectors who can tell us about, well, that might be a good idea, but here's why it would be really hard to administer. But here's some other alternatives y'all might consider, that kind of thing. So to have that kind of ongoing dialogue's been invaluable, especially for Chad and his team.
Yeah, I mean, I would think it'd be valuable input to get kind of real life reaction to whatever we're.
That's their goal. They're the grassroots of. So thank y'all, Ms. Welch and the committee over the years that I've been on. I mean, it's really impressive and welcome. That's exactly what they do. They have a pulse on what's going on in the financial aid community, the grassroots level. They talk to all the sectors, then they work with the coordinating board staff And then when we get information, that's what the board, so we rely very heavily on what's going on the ground, real world. And so I think that that committee is outstanding. They've done great work over the years. So thank you, and thank the other committee members, because by the time it gets to the board level, they've done a lot of groundwork. And as the commissioner said, they're the sounding board. And when there's issues around the state with all the sectors, they visit with the committee and then they visit with the staff. And that's how decisions are made. So that's how we have our ear to the pulse of the financial aid world and higher education in the state. So thank you for your work, and thank you for being here.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We move on to agenda item 6 is adjournment. Do I have members in favor? Say aye.
move.
Second, and then members who are in favor say aye. Any nays? Motion passes. This conclude the meeting on committee involving on innovation data and educational analytics.